Good morning, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for tuning in today with us, whether you are joining us live or listening to the podcast of this Insight series. I am Pauline Vicard, the co-founder and executive director of Areni Global. And it's my huge pleasure to guide the discussions today and to welcome you. So for those of you who do not know Areni yet, Areni is a research institute dedicated to the future of fine wine. And basically what we do is we're trying to understand the many ways in which the world is changing and how those different changes are impacting the world of wine today and likely to impact it tomorrow. And we do that through many formats because we organize international think tank, we organize insight series like this. We've got 2 podcasts a month. We do articles twice a month as well, but we also put key market research together with research partners like Philippe Levaux on the fine wine consumer, for example. We've got a new website. It's really new. We've launched it just between us on Friday, so you can go and have a look to the new branding and to the new website. It's quite exciting. There you can also find a lot of resources that are accessible to you all, again, from the podcast and the articles that I was talking about. And we also have a new membership program if you want to join us as members so that you can have access to all the reports, the publication and analysis that we are doing. And you can also get access to the many different roundtables that we are also putting together to address some of the most important questions on the future of fine wine. We've got a discount code to celebrate the launch of the new website. I'm sure Sarah is going to put everything you need on the chat if that's of interest to you. And you can also follow us on social media. I think all of them, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But back to the topic of today. And that's a funny one. That's why I'm smiling, because I love cooperatives. I'm sure you're going to find out that I've got a deep love for the concept of cooperative. And actually in 2016, the UNESCO added cooperatives in the list of intangible cultural assets, recognizing them as entities that allow for community building through shared interest and values, creating innovative solutions to societal problems, from generating employment and assisting seniors to urban revitalisation and renewable energy projects. But I grew up in Burgundy because my parents decided to flee the Beaujolais and to escape the Beaujolais and the village cooperatives they were working in, producing bulk wine to local consumers at the time. And they decided to come to Burgundy and fly with their own wings and create something different. And of course, as I'm sure that it's not going to be a surprise to most of you, when I decided to put that conversation together today on cooperatives and fine wine, the first reaction that I had was like, what? Cooperative and fine wine? Well, that's unusual. How do you see that coming together? And the whole idea, but we've got an amazing panel to discuss that, is, well, simply because over the last decades, like many of you in the audience today, I have been tasting wines from cooperatives that were extremely well made, premium in price, and vision driven. And I've also met a new generation of both trade and consumers, less maybe embedded in the cliche that, you know, cooperatives are only here to produce mass market cheap wines, but actively interested in the cooperative models and also the diversity that it brings to the narrative. We'll explore that in detail. So how did these shifts happen? Are cooperatives the next big thing for fine wine or not? And can they be a source of inspiration for our whole fine wine ecosystem? That's basically the big questions for today, quite a big program. And in order to explore that topic, I am thrilled to welcome 4 amazing panelists. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us today. We've got Philippe Levaux, the CEO of Cordier by InVivo in France, which is one of the biggest cooperative groups. So Philippe, you had the wine part, but it's also a part of a bigger agricultural cooperative. There's not only viticulture in InVivo, but we're only going to talk about the wine part today. We've got Roman Horvath, Master of Wine. Roman, you're the director for Domaine Wachau in Austria. And you're also quite well known for the amazing wines that you produce in Austria. Christian Olthuizen, who's the founder of Westbrook Marketing Partners, and whose birthday is today. So happy birthday, Christian. Thank you so much for being with us on such a special day. Christian, you wear many hats, and I'm sure you will explain them as we converse together, but you have more than 20 years of experience in Champagne and different actors, but you also have an incredible international and global perspective on both trade and consumers, and you're going to help us do that bridge between trade and consumers. And last but certainly not least, Brandon Carter, tuning from Australia. So thank you so much, first of all, for staying up late to be with us. And also the idea in having Brandon around is like, you don't usually associate Australia with cooperatives. So that was also an idea of what outside of Europe, what can cooperative means, how they can work, and why are they needed or not in a different environment than only Europe. And just before I strike the first question, I also wanted to thank Jean-Marc Touzard, who's the Research and Innovation Director at the INRAE, which is the National Institute for Agricultural Research in France, and who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but has been helping me a lot and contributing a lot to the preparation of this conversation, because he's been researching the topic of cooperative for more than 15 years. I know there's quite a lot of MW students in the audience. If ever you need more information on that research, I have that research, and I'm very happy to share it. All right, that's enough about me. Let's dive deep into the topic. And I think, Roman, my first question was for you, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of MW students and other students in the audience as well. And maybe the first question could be, can you explain briefly to us what are cooperatives, how they operate, and how also the governance system works? Because I think it's important to understand before we go further.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline. Great pleasure being with you, and thanks a lot for the invitation, being on the panel of this session. Yeah, cooperatives. Well, of course, we're focusing on Vintner, on wine cooperatives, because cooperatives exist in many other industries as well. Obviously, well, not obviously, but mostly in other industries, cooperatives seem to be much more successful than in the wine industry. And there are some reasons behind it. In simple words, a cooperative produces and hopefully sells wine made from grapes grown by its members or member growers. Seems pretty easy to understand, but behind that, of course, there are a lot of complications. So producers, growers meet, they form a kind of club or association, and try to sell this wine. Of course, they need some rules for that. I'm referring mostly on the German, Austrian historical background. There might be slight differences to Italy and France and Spain. But here you have this kind of charter, constitution, statute that you start with, and that's mostly highly bureaucratically written to organize yourself in a general assembly where all the growers meet. You elect an executive board or a board of directors, and the head of the executive board or board of directors is the chairman or the president. And sometimes you have a supervisory board who is checking the board of directors, and that's it. They're growers meeting and trying to produce wine. They have the cellar together, and that's already kind of obstacle, because in most situations there are many small growers. They are deeply embedded in the local culture, however, not with the vision on the market, and not with the view on how to distribute the wine, how to organize such a complex structure. And that's where we start from with a cooperative.
And basically, normally it's one man or one woman, but one person, one vote in the decision that you take. And it's also, as you mentioned, the fact that the vines are their own, but the material to produce the wine, the equipment are collective, right? And it's the property of the cooperative. Philippe, do you want to add anything on how cooperative works, just for us to understand really that big beast that cooperative can be?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Roman gave a nice definition of the COP system. He mentioned the fact that it's slightly different, or could be slightly different in Germany, in Austria versus Italy, France, or versus Argentina, versus Chile, New Zealand. But everything is starting from the same point of view, or same starting point. Alone you go quicker, as a team you go further. And most of the time we'd like to share situations, and most of the time the co-ops have been here because the situation was not in favor of the agricultural production. Another key point for me is the fact that it's you've got a footprint or a fingerprint. It's about a set specific area built around the associates, the growers who are member of the COP. But as an example, if you have a COP in the Rhône Valley, they are able to produce Rhône wine from either the specific AOP region, but they are not able to do any trade on any kind of investments in France, but that's also the same in certain other countries I mentioned, in other areas. So I think it's very important to understand that the footprint is there as a political income. Yes, one man, one lady, one vote. So as you can imagine, the size and the type of members are different. So you have a lot of politics. And for me, the governance, and when most of the cooperatives are successful, is the one where the politics stay on the policy side of the management, and that the manager, they say the CEO, have the full power to develop the strategy. And that's where most of the time the co-ops are making the mistakes not to invest enough in the operational and executive management. So yes, this is roughly what it is. So for us, as and I will finish on that point, as In Vivo, we are a union of cooperatives. So in fact, we have a vehicle which is able to build together and merge the proposal of every single COP, and then do a sort of French list of wine from the various territory. And the union is here to develop the business from our members, the COPs. And so we have a proposal today, which is covering from Bordeaux, Languedoc, Beaujolais, Burgundy, and Champagne. And that's where a union of COP, which is new and which is different than the COP system, is helping to develop the entire French offer, as an example. Or when I can give another example, Fecovita in Argentina is also in the same sort of system, or Caviro in Italy is also a sort of union of cooperative.
And I should have asked you as the introduction, but Roman and Philippe, how many cooperateurs, how many vine growers are you gathering in your cooperatives, or Philippe, your union of cooperatives? How many growers do you represent?
Here at Domaine Wachau, we speak about 250 family growers, because in agriculture, of course, because of tax reasons and other reasons, a farm or a vineyard is divided in between the family. The father has something, and the son and the daughter and the grandparents still have a little bit of vineyards. And each of them is a member. However, they work together in the vineyard. That's why we, as Domaine Wachau, we talk about family growers. And in total, it 250. But in total, we also have 500 memberships. But this kind of membership is not so important about with us anymore, because we need the people that we can talk to, that we communicate to directly, and this is usually 1 or 2 persons within the family, and the others just the owner of the vineyard.
On our side, Pauline, we aggregate 3,800 growers for a total of 28,000 hectares. So some of them are just bringing us the grapes. Other could be member of the crops, but are doing their own vinifications. And either some of them could be member of the crops, doing their vinification and the bottling at the property. Okay, different angle, but most of the time, if I look after Champagne, for example, today, this kind of growers having their brand of Champagne from their domain is less and less, because the revenue is so nice and good at the moment from LVMH and other negociants that is no more need to develop their own brands. When I look after another cup like Buzet, everything is sold out by the COP because it's no sense also to have their own brands. But to make a link for you, an easy one, COPs and fine wine. One of the biggest producer of Saint-Émilion is l'Union des producteurs de Saint-Émilion, sorry. It's a COP. Mm-hmm. It's a COP from that very famous area, and one of the biggest in terms of volume producer. And some of their brands or labels are also gain some gold medal in a few and very nice marks anyway. So also our COPs are able or are involved in the fine wine business, like Saint-Émilion.
Or la Chablisienne in Chablis, ou les caves de thym in the Rhône. I'm sorry, because I'm quoting French one because that's the one that I know the best. But and Roman, you were saying that cooperatives are more successful in other fields, but I mean, in France, it's still 52% of the wine production, and sometimes I'm not going to deep into that to dive in this because, of course, we're just talking about fine wine, and we know that not all cooperatives are doing fine wine, and they shouldn't do. That's not the main. Well, not all of them can do. But I like to go back to the role of cooperatives because you mentioned some of them before. When you do a bit of research on cooperatives, and of course you also mentioned that Roman and Philippe, between the different countries there was slightly different history resulting in slightly different models, but more or less it was always the same thing. It was, why did cooperatives suddenly emerge? It was to maintain people on the land and to stop the rural exodus towards the city. It was to bring research and education in rural parts of the country as well. It was a way to develop the progrès technique, the technical progress through cooperative. It was also political in France, or a really religious tool, more in Germany apparently. I mean, Jean Jaurès and his vision of socialism, that's why cooperatives were developed in the south of France as well. Philippe, you mentioned the counter power through volume, like the fact that we're here to get together and counter the big houses or the big players, and of course the economy of scale. And so those were the historical reason why cooperatives got together, more or less. Why are they still important to the viticultural landscape today? I mean, those reasons that were at the start of cooperatives, are they still valid today? Do we still need cooperatives for the same thing? And I'm very happy to open the floor on that one for whomever wants to answer. Roman, maybe, do you think we need the cooperative for the same reason as we needed when they were created?
Not in the same way anymore. I mean, a major reason was and still is that the production side was or still is in some parts highly fragmented, but on the consumer side you have a high level of concentration with the multiple grocers and yeah, economies of scale for export business and distribution. So you need producers who are able to provide volume and hopefully also in very, very good quality. On the other side, you have this type of négociant and bottling companies buying in bulk and so on. But it's a different approach. And as a cooperative, I think you can add so much more to the wine business because it's always with ownership of the vineyard. It's always very, very local, culturally also very, very valuable because the people here are part of the land, are part of what we do, are extremely good in what they do in the vineyard. They just don't have the power or the size going on the market, and having a mutual goal or a team spirit for reaching the next level is something very, very important.
And Brendan, I'm going to ask you the same question, because again, as I said, Australia is not really well known for its cooperatives. I think more or less all of the traditional European modern ones have disappeared. But you came up with Harvest, which was it's a cooperative in like what they call new cooperatives model now. And we've seen some of them in the New World emerged. Can you tell us why in the viticultural landscape that you were in Australia, you thought that there was a need for cooperative approach, and how did it work, and the type of emulation you had? Tell us a bit more about that project.
Cool. So in Australia, as contrary to, I guess, a lot of the old world, most of the fruit that is essentially grown and sold for wine production is sold at farm gate. So the evaluating step that is completed is actually completed by the winery. The winery is built, or the wine brands are built as machines to make and sell wine, which means because there is a transaction that happens at farm gate, the only opportunities for the growers to make profit actually work backwards from there. They need to find a very narrow way to be able to extract enough money to typically feed a family, or perhaps even employ 1 or 2 staff to be able to manage and run that vineyard. And that sort of predefines a lot of little things about the vineyard. Firstly, how does a grower make more money? Well, they could sell more fruit. They could up the price of their fruit, or they could lower their cost inputs to be able to maximize their profits. And I understand this is talking about really basic fundamentals, but this actually highlights how simple the problem is and how simple the problem is for cooperatives to actually fix. Because the transaction happens there, that also, and typically they're trying to feed a house of X amount of people or employ 1 or 2 staff members, it largely predetermines the size of vineyard as well. So this starts to really lock in the grower to not really being able to do much else. So in a premium region like the Adelaide Hills, where we're set up, the rule of thumb is around about 80 hectares. You can't employ people below that. It is not possible with market prices for fruit over the last 40 years. So if you want to employ people to be able to take some of the load off, so perhaps you can make some wine, sell some wine, you're really looking at 100, 120 hectares. So you're looking at a lot of fruit. That's the other thing. You're looking at maybe 1,000 tons, nearly 1 million bottles being produced off that vineyard at the requested yields that most of the wineries request for. So again, locking you in, how do you build a winery that can process 1 million bottles? Then you need $10 to $20 million just to throw at it. So it really locks the growers in the place that they are. Now, wine purchasing, 75% of all grape purchases are happening by 4 very large wine companies. 2 of them three of them big multinationals, one of them, a local conglomerate of privatized companies. Now, it's of course illegal for price fixing to occur, but through this sort of restrictive model where growers don't really have another choice, there's not a lot of buyers to be able to acquire 400 tons to 1,000 tons off your vineyard. And it's usually organized around about September. Now that is September through to harvest is going to happen around February, March. Now, if a grower gets to February, March and goes, you know what, we don't agree with that price, we're going to go with one of the other ones. And then the other company knows that they're distressed and aren't going to necessarily offer an even higher price. Again, locking that grower in. And through a weird mechanism that is quite legal in Australia, ends up fixing the price. So the grower has two particular options to be able to maximize their revenue. They can't raise their price, they can grow more. So what we started to see was outrageous amounts of irrigation. So probably the most egregious was during the bushfire years, where we're looking at upwards of 18 megalitres per hectare, 18 million litres per hectare, which just conceptually is bonkers. 2.9 megalitres is an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So that was at the most egregious standard. You know, usually we're seeing around about anywhere between 5 and 11 or 12 megalitres per hectare. That's just to keep the vineyard viable for the fruit load that they would need. Now, what's happening is wineries are therefore dropping their price, but then removing yield restrictions. So growers going, cha-ching, I can make lots of money here. I'm going to irrigate the crap out of this vineyard, and I'm going to accept a much lower price, much lower contracts, locking them in for 3-year contracts. And then doubling down and going, well, now I need to lower the cost input into the vineyard. So I'll do barrel pruning and just do a minimal prune once every 2 years. So the vine's health is degrading. We're seeing drastic degradation in soil structure due to rising salt damp, because we have very sodic soils here in Australia. And growers that are largely locked in on a bit of a knife edge because they don't have enough resources to be able to launch their own wine brands. They can't really negotiate against the pricing models and structures being offered to them by wineries. And the vineyards are starting to, in big drought years, it's devastating. When we saw 2019, 2020 backed up, as 2019 was the hottest year on record, backed up by 2020, which beat that. And the driest years on record, we start seeing growers just selling their vineyards under distress. So harvest
and as you were saying, the price of water is also making it not financially sustainable anyway, because it's
that was just bonkers. The price of water went from $120 per megaliter up to literally tenfold, $1,200 per megaliter in a span of 3 years.
And so for you, having that cooperative, having somewhere where that could give and different options to wine growers, that was breaking that cycle, and breaking that cycle of always producing more, so having to produce in a less quality. So again, if we think about the future of fine wine, it's funny to think that cooperative like this, or cooperative initiative, collaborative initiative, can break that cycle and actually help increase quality because of increasing revenue. And Roman, that's what you did as well at Domaine Bacao. You kind of broke that cycle of always producing more to having more quantity and just paying people on quantity, but also paying them on quality and reversing that cycle. Can you explain a bit to us how you did break that cycle and what did it take?
It's a little bit different picture on a traditional cooperative here in Europe, because usually you have a given size of hectarage and growers, and the challenge with cooperatives here is to move out of this bulk business, because usually most of the wine produced by cooperatives is sold in bulk. And even if you have cooperatives that sell, for here in Austria, that have their brands on the market, it's still 80-90% that's sold in bulk. And then you're on the open market. You're open to all the fluctuations with all the pressure from the market. So it's important that you go that way, that you have your full production bottles, and then step by step you increase quality. And breaking this cycle is something, extremely challenging. With us, it worked because time when we started, the cooperative representatives were not in the best situation and didn't have a different choice than working with us. And the first period, we focused mostly on the market and to gain new chances for distribution and increasing a bit the percentage of bottled wines. And that way we could already increase the income for the growers, which is expressed in euros per kilogram. And that builds some trust. And then you start a slow circle. And after a few years, increasing the income of the growers, we started asking for more quality and started in a complete restructuring of the cooperative. And the decision-making processes, and yeah, going deep into the structure of the cooperative. But we started this kind of beginning or positive first impression some 16, 17 years ago.
So that's a long-term project, and I know that
yeah, I
you're
mean,
not.
that's wine. That's everything in wine. It's a long-term project. That's also a challenge because you need good management. Nowadays, if you look into other fields and industry, management is usually a 3 to 5 years period, but that doesn't work in wine. So you need a 10, 15, 20 years view and even longer. So with a normal manager, you're not doing good things in cooperative.
That's what Philippe was saying. It's all about the leadership. Christian, you've been listening to the gentleman, and I know that you also have been listening to the market, and notably the French market, but you've seen consumers and trade reacting to those French wine all over the world. What's cooperative for you? What role do they have to play? And also particularly maybe with the consumers?
I think we, all of us have a real opportunity to redefine cooperative, to redefine cooperation, to really get people to wrap their heads around it. What I find quite funny in Champagne is the absence of the cooperative narrative. In the fine world wine community over the last 15 years, in places like London, in places like Tokyo, it's always framed, are you a grower champagne or house? It's always négociant or récoltant manipulant. Well, the cooperatives are a huge part of Champagne. I mean, 50% of the Champagne appellation is cooperatives. Why are they so powerful and have such a force de frappe in Champagne, but they don't get talked about in the market? A lot of people on the markets, when they think of certain cooperative brands, they think of them as négociants, they think of them as maison de champagne. They don't think of them as being a cooperative. And I think some producers in Champagne have even tried to hide the fact that they're a cooperative, which is absolutely ridiculous. One of the things that Roman said, which I think is really important, is that co-ops exist all over the world, not just in wine. We have this tendency to sort of think that cooperatives is just, we'll just throw it all into the pot and it's fine. It's completely wrong. I mean, 1911 in Champagne, when we had the important revolution, that was when people started to first mobilize and realize that they had to work together because these farmers were being exploited big time, and they decided to get together. And the very first cooperatives in Champagne go back to that period just after the First World War, before the appellation was even defined. So they've been this powerful force in Champagne for over a century, but we don't really talk about them that much. So I hate false dichotomies more than anything. I hate English sparkling wine versus Champagne. There are great producers and shit producers everywhere, like in the world. I don't like cooperative versus grower versus house. There's cooperatives that are amazing. There's négociants that are amazing. There's growers that are amazing. And there's mediocre producers in all stripes. What I think people don't really understand about cooperatives is just how important it is to have coalitions, to teach, to basically help your farmers farm better, to be converted to haute valeur environnementale, to actually learn how to treat less, to learn how to share best practices. And not just in one region, but I think like globally, I think it's really important that different cooperatives start to actually share best practices of how things are going. Because it surprises me how much inside the appellations we talk about cooperatives, but the cooperative consumer narrative, it doesn't exist. There's nothing about it at all. And I think we're really missing an opportunity to explain what are some of the benefits of being a cooperative. I mean, I look at, I had the chance to work last year on a project with Nicolas Foyat when they merged with the CRVC. That group, Sierra Vignon de Champagne, is now 6 3,000 members, 3,000 hectares. It's 9% of the entire Champagne appellation. Talk about the richness and the diversity of that group in terms of all of the things that they have like at their disposal. Like that could be considered probably one of the greater palettes available in Champagne. That to me, as far as I'm concerned, is certainly fine wine. It doesn't need to be coming from a single parcel to be considered fine wine. So I think we need to, this is a great point of departure, but I think we all agree we need to talk more about cooperatives and what makes them special and what makes them different. Because the consumer today, I think, has no idea.
Yes, and actually that's a really good link. I think we'll go back to the narrative and how we can tell the story and how interesting the story is. But I also know that there's a lot of wine geeks just like me in the audience. So I'd like to talk a bit about winemaking before we move on to the narrative. And that's to you, Roman, Brendan, and Philippe, because there's a misconception in the world of co-ops, like Christian said, that it's just people bringing all their grapes and it all comes into one big tank, and then it makes the wine. Philippe, let's maybe start with you, because In Vivo produces different level of wine qualities through the different cooperatives, some that are more on the fine wine spectrum, some are more on the entry level spectrum. How you differentiate your fine wine production or your more premium wine production in the cooperative, and how can you supervise winemaking when there's so much diversity, as Christian said, which is both a hindrance and a help, I suppose? How does that work in the cellar?
It's a very tough, not question, but it's a very tough challenge we have every day. Because with what Christian mentioned about and we can look after various countries or areas on the historical point, and some of the region we have been fine wine in the past, are no more. New regions are fine wine today, and so on. So I think and I will come back to the winemaker and the team have we balance, but the key point for us as executive in a co-op organization, I mean, this is my status, is the fact that I have to answer the yearly question about revenue. And I have to explain them that also the way we will work together, the way we will develop some of the brands will have an effect on something which is different, which is the assets. And the balance between the revenue, which is what I need for today, for this year, and the fact that I'm doing some investments in the new way of conducting the vineyards, because we put some cahier des charges specifications today, because we influence the payments and the value by bonus minus concerning quality standards, is having today an effect on the revenue, but will have an effect on their property concerning the assets. Okay, I always explain
so
that.
the long-term value.
It's a long term, because if I look after what I know, which is France, 1 hectare, and this is an hectare, so we are talking the same hectare everywhere in the world. 1 hectare of Fitou, today you can buy it for 8,000 euros. When you know that in Burgundy or Saint-Emilion, the same hectare with wines, you can sometimes have to buy it for 7 million euros. What makes the difference is, okay, something that you can't buy in the supermarket next door. It's reputations, it's developments, is the idea of fine wines, is the market of fine wine, but it's still 1 hectare. So this is what I call the patrimoine, the assets of a grower, and that's a long-term view. Anyway, how we play it with the winemaker is that his specifications, his trends, is more and more, and you know that, and with the partnership we have with you, Pauline, is we try to understand better the consumer and give that information or evidences to the growers. because most of the time, because of what Christian and Roman mentioned, and Brendan as well, is that most of the time the growers, through the COP system, plus the negociant on the top, plus the retailers or the cavistes offer, they have so many layers that they don't have any good view and information about the demand. So they are still a producer of a local AOP. They all believe that Fitu is the best wine in the world. Okay, so they are not understanding why we are not able to sell it better at a better price for their revenue. And so because they have not the full pictures, and they have a lack of information. So that information concerning the trend, concerning the knowledge we have concerning the market, plus the interpretations through our winemaker team, makes the specifications, make the long-term plans that we have. Today we are developing more white wine in the Toulouse area. It's a 10-year plan, okay? And we guarantee certain revenue. Concerning the fine wine, we are pushing Languedoc very hard at the moment. We are asking some of our producers who have a very good domain to move to the Place de Bordeaux, for example. It's how we can help to either have an effect, positive effect on the revenue, but more than that, have an effect on the total assets of the grower.
So you talk a lot about financial sustainability, which we've seen with Brendan was also the core of the problem, like money, and cooperative having that positive impact on long-term assets and revenue and steadiness, also for vine growers. Brendan, I know that your project was also very much driven by environmental sustainability and what you could achieve by giving people more money for their grapes. Can you tell us a bit more about well, continue the story that you started earlier? Like, well, you've seen a need and then what you did and what the result that you had.
Sure. So I suppose in reference to like our way of conceptualizing this is there's no actual difference. Like if you go from a far 80-20 view, there's no actual difference between grapes coming from a vineyard, going to a winery, being put into a bottle and sold to a consumer. It's just with a cooperative model or similar type structure, the big difference is the motivations, the soft motivations that growers have to grow quality flow all the way through to the market, as opposed to stopping at farm gate. So the idea was we needed to move transactions from farm gate all the way to the market. What we didn't expect was what I guess in finance terms you would call the size of the arbitrage, the gap, the difference in profitability between farmers and wineries for what is and was some of the cheapest wine being made in Australia. It was astronomical. We were, the way the model worked was remarkably simple. And in fact, we tried to avoid probably the three key things that would have legitimized us as a cooperative, which is ownership, governance, and control. We tried to develop models that removed those things because we recognized that those are the things that actually bedded down and slowed down cooperatives and made the barrier for entry into a cooperative model quite difficult, especially in Australia. So what we found was basically grapes came in for free. Growers can choose to sell to other people if they want to. They could bring them into us. If they got knocked back for whatever reason, we'll turn them into wine. Would sell the wine and we give them a 50% profit share on the final product. Big, nice, easy, simple model to communicate and to conceptualize. What we didn't realize is giving them 50% profit, which was more than profitable for the winery. Like we were very happy. From the grower's perspective, it was over 400% more than they were garnering for the sales of their fruit. Notwithstanding the fact that the way that payment terms operate for fruit is different to the way that payment terms operated for us, we were also guaranteeing them twice as quick a cash flow. Yeah. So we were paying them twice as quickly and 400% more than they were actually getting used to. And it's really interesting, the effect that happens is when the grower, and this could be second or third generation growers, suddenly have a lot more money to play with, they kind of really don't know what to do with it. And so what they do is they go, well, I'm going to get a new tractor. I'm going to employ someone to come and work it. They were going to us going, what should we be grafting? We had the opportunities to take grape varieties that were incredibly unsustainable for those sites and then move them to varieties that were inherently drought resistant, that would decrease the risk of water shortages. And in fact, in one particular case, we had a grower that was interested in selling their water license to their neighbor. And the neighbor's scratching their head going, well, why? Why would we want to buy your water? Don't you use your water? Well, we don't need to anymore because we're not growing Syrah in a desert. We're growing Fiano or Nero d'Avola, which is much more appropriate. So yeah, the impact that we started to see was, rather than this gradual degradation of a vineyard's quality and the land's quality, we started to actually see an improvement in what is essentially the farmer's fixed asset. The farmer can't just magic up more grapes without going to more nefarious growing tactics. So the easiest way that we could ensure their profitability was to lower their costs indirectly rather than directly, or increase their holdings of more appropriate varieties so that they could demand more premium price points into the future, and which has worked incredibly well. We've doubled the profitability of a number of growers through the Adelaide Hills purely based on the fact that they're not growing Sauvignon Blanc anymore, but instead growing things like Fiano.
And one of the things that you said that we might not realize, being from exterior people, is the mindset that it gives you when suddenly you've got the money in the bank and you don't have to chase for your money for 6 months. And suddenly, well, now you've got time to think, and now you can do stuff. And now, because you're engaged in the project as well, you can think a bit more long term of what you want to do. Because nobody likes to grow in a bad way, right? Nobody, all those farmers, they like their soil like everybody else. So not a lot of people like working with bad practices. Usually they do it
totally.
They
Absolutely.
don't see an
I mean, they need to try to find a way to be profitable. What was interesting was the lack of design of a motivation that was not tokenistic. So at the moment, if you want to grow better grapes, we'll pay you more money and then you'll go and do it. This was a little bit different. They knew that if they were invested into the brand, and they can ensure that the brand was successful, and the success of the brand was tied to the quality of wines, which was tied to the quality of grapes, then we had already developed the soft measures in place without it actually costing more cash. In fact, it was the whole process, because we had already put the capital investment into the winery ourselves. The growers were just giving their grapes. They'd already put the capital investment into that year's crop. By the time we were on to maybe the second or the third year of operation, the sheer quantity of cash that we had given them, being 400% more than made up for that initial time delay for them to be able to get their profit in. So suddenly they're actually got a very good cash flow positive model that has a nice soft measure of or soft incentivification that keeps the grower wanting to grow higher quality.
Thank you so much. And there's a question in the chat that I think, Roman, is the perfect tie-up with you. The question is, how do you encourage the younger generation to stay within the cooperative system to avoid losing members and vineyards? And I'm directing that question to you because I know that when you started, that was one of your first key points to measuring success, the fact that you would be able to maintain people on their field. How do you ensure generational sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, as a cooperative of a certain size, you have a big cellar, and yeah, producing wine is a high investment industry field, and you need the machinery only for a short time, so the presses and tanks and so on. So you need to have a minimum volume just to cover your fixed costs. So becoming smaller and smaller would be extremely dangerous for also for other companies. We want our growers, our members, to be proud of what they do. Proud that they are farmers, proud that they're vignerons, proud that they grow grapes, and not any average anonymous grapes, but grapes that's part of one of the best wines from Austria, or one of the best wines, going to one of the best wines from Wachau. And it's their job. We overcame the challenge of winemaking, which is important, but what we do not see as the crucial part of our job. Of course, it's organizing logistics and mastery of processes. but the quality comes from the vineyard, and that's their job. That's their duty. And a cooperative at the end is about what comes from the vineyard, and organizing the work in the vineyards, and defining precise picking dates, and going a step further in all the measures that you need for high quality wine production today, and not using insecticides, and going towards organic and so on. That's what what's our goal, and our growers need to compare themselves with the high-end super iconic estates from Wachau, and that's why we wanna see them, and that's why we want to how they see themselves.
So pride and vision, in a way, is how you maintain people on the land.
Yeah.
Moving to the next aspect of the conversation, because I think Christian, you mentioned this already, and I think we agree on this. Why don't we talk more about cooperatives? Why isn't the model that cooperatives are more part of the narrative? And Christian, you've noticed something in the wine bars in Paris that are usually setting the trends internationally about how the new generation is reacted to the cooperative story. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Well, I think the way that we look at fine wine is also very different. I mean, I'm 48 years old today. When I started in Champagne, I mean, Champagne was a lot of people that came and sat in Reims and talked about the 18th century and caviar and didn't talk about the vineyards at all. Today, when people come to Champagne, the first thing they want to do is they want to know how you farm. Do you use herbicides? Do you use pesticides? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? They want to actually go out into the vineyard. Even 15 years ago, every Prestige Cuvée had to be in this ridiculous like gift box, which is like the most evil thing possible. You can't recycle it. You can't do anything with it. Now, today, people don't want gift boxes. People don't want that. So I look at what people are looking at in terms of real indicators of luxury. Like I look at what Brendan and Laura are doing with Inquisito. I mean, protecting farmers, a focus on sustainability, on non-impactful methods, B Corp, because it's not just about the land, it's also about are men and women being paid the same thing? Is diversity like an issue? Like for me, those are the kinds of things that I, as a modern luxury consumer, is much more interested in. What Roman is doing at Wachau, I think that focusing on this idea of vintner families as the heroes, like it is the families, it is the heart and soul of like what we're doing. And I think people are much more interested in how people are being treated and compensated. And that to me is, I think, particularly of interest for people much younger than a lot of us today, like in Paris, like, you know, it's quite cool. Like, my father's generation cooperatives were like this place where you just dumped everything. I'm in Paris right now on the 4th. If you walk outside my door, there's a co-op next door selling cheese, vegetables, wine. Every single product like in the place comes from a cooperative, and it is packed with like hipster, like 25 to 30-year-olds all the time. And they actually think the fact that it comes from a cooperative is like super cool. So like, I think that we are in a cool moment now, and we can, to what I was saying before, we can redefine it, but also say these are the values that we need to champion, the sustainable values, but the real human values. And I just think it's a great opportunity, but people are more and more interested in that. They want to know what is real and how your farmers are farming, but also how are they being treated.
And I've asked that question to many sommeliers around the world as well. And it's not just the final consumers, but there's a lot of sommeliers out there that are willing to listen to a different narrative and, you know, always looking out for something new to tell to the customer. And that collective approach is really interesting for them.
I also think, sorry, I'm sorry,
yeah.
the other thing is, I think it's also in line with what people want today. I mean, look at Mélenchon supporters in France, look at Bernie Sanders supporters like in the United States, like, people are interested in those stories. That's the stories that people want today. They want to talk about real, concrete, like social responsibility, and how people are being treated. So I think that like we could get a few sommeliers on board globally and get them to really start talking about this more and more, because I think it's a huge opportunity.
And something that the wine world hasn't addressed so far, social sustainability that much. Philippe, In Vivo is one of France's first entreprise à mission, a corporation with a mission. I don't know how to translate this, but there's more to in vivo that just making money and revenue. How do you translate this into your communication? We're talking about the narrative. How are you planning on communicating the fact that you are not just another player on the wine world, and you've got purpose and ethos?
I think to make a link with what Christian was just mentioning, everything starts from the point that it was not enough just to say we are a co-op. It's the fact that we are including also the CSR strategy and policy, including how are people treated as a farmer, are one of our members, plus the workers and the staff who is developing the company. So a lot of things make sense, plus the fact that even though that's more financially, a more financial point, but we have to be proud about the fact that we are important in the global economy, and especially in the farming economy, and that's that helps also to put the key challenge in front of us to make those transparency and enough transparency in our model through the governance and our also goals, and then have an access to the green potential financing. Okay, so it's a sort of balance between we need to be proud of what we are, includes what is the trend, and again, what globally the consumer, the citizens are demanding. So we can't exclude ourselves or just highlight the fact that, yes, we are from the farming part of the business, so we are green enough. So it's include the CSR, and then be so transparent and inclusive that we are, and we could have access to a financing model, which helps the developing our growers, our companies, our brands, and the business. And that includes fine wines, because as you can see, and you know, fine wine is very attractive to the financial world. So that's why globally, not only the wine, but we move to that new standard of company, new statutory company.
Yeah. And Roman, maybe that question to you, because you and I, we've talked about it before, the fact that Domaine Vacao, how do you put the fact that it's a cooperative forward? Because I've always feel with cooperative that they have to fight so much to be recognized for the quality of their wines, that it's such a big part for them. Then they don't really talk about that different narrative that Christian was saying. Is that going to be a bigger part of your narrative? That, you know,
yeah, that's an important point. And so I've been working here now for 17 years. And we discussed, so we have a small team of wine enthusiasts working here and distribution and so on. We've discussed a lot about how we tell the story and about our narrative. And for a long time, for the first 10, 12, 14 years, we did not actively tell the story about a cooperative. It's very, very recently that we started to put the story of each of our growers on our website, and that we tell proactively that we are cooperative, and it's a very, very unique approach in the wine industry and about the advantages. But it's a very, very recent change in our story. And for a long time, we didn't dare to say that we are cooperative. I mean, the wine professionals knew it anyway, but we have a lot of wine tourism here, and for the average consumer, we better hide it somehow because it's a complicated story, and it's difficult for someone who is not involved in wine production or in wine growing to understand it, because usually it's the one figure hero that is responsible for success and for high quality, and not a collective group of small growers. So it's a complicated story that makes it a little bit more challenging. But now we are telling the narrative very, very proudly.
is it time to be proud as well, Brendan? Like how did the consumer of Harvest react it? Because I know you were actively telling that story about being collaborative in your project.
Yeah, it was huge. In a span of 3 years, we grew from 10,000 bottles to $600,000 bottles. Sorry, and so that's quite a significant, nearly 1 million liters, just in the domestic Australian market. So very, it's pretty interesting that the difference for me in determining fine wine is determining what isn't commodity. And mimic all comments, it's narrative. And in fact, more particularly, the success of that narrative largely depends on its ability to be relevant. So sometimes people would say this is us taking a bit of a measure on what the market wants, but what the market is being determined by largely, at least in our purview, is millennial and now Zoomer buyers, Gen Z buyers. Who are desiring to be closer and closer to how their produce is indeed grown. That's oddly enough, brands do a damn good job at acting as a bit of a gatekeeper, preventing people from getting closer to how their food is grown. And so cooperatives kind of come at it at a different angle. Whilst overseas, I'm completely aware that cooperatives have a bit of a bad rap. In Australia, we don't have that. Our bad rap was what we call chateau cardboard. We put cheap wine in boxes. The concept of cooperative is, even the word itself, the word association, it doesn't even exist here. If you were to sell something with the word cooperative on it, it would sell twice as quickly at twice the price. Hands down, easy.
Well, Roman, you have to sell your wines to Australia now.
Yeah.
And you as well change the packaging.
Contact my Australian importer.
Hey man, I love your wine. They're fantastic.
and maybe because I'm very aware of the time, and as you know, we could continue that conversation for hours. But as a wrap up for each of you, maybe going back to the original question of what can cooperatives bring to the future of fine wine, or if the fine wine ecosystem of today had to learn something from the cooperative world, what would it be?
Yeah, pay growers more.
and you said to me, and I'm just going to repeat because I thought that was such a good one when we prepared together. You said the fine wine is all about terroir. It's about. Can you quote yourself again on this?
I mean, like that's the thing. That's why wine is wine. It's about place. It's about terroir. We know this. I think it's kind of redundant talking about it in this forum, but. The imposition, if growers aren't fairly paid or incentivized to grow better grapes and look after their land, then the entire industry, or at least fine wine industry, would simply shoot itself in the foot. It's just going backwards. That's what cooperatives do. Cooperatives incentivize growers empowers growers, gives agency to growers and growing families to grow higher quality. And quality literally always wins in every industry.
Roman, anything that the fine wine world could learn?
If fine wine is about high-priced wines and billionaires buying wine for their cellars and thousands of bottles they cannot drink, then we cannot add that much. But when we see fine wine as a product that needs to be developed sustainable in a social, ethical way, I think that's something where cooperatives can even be kind of spearhead, because being socially and ethically sustainable is something that's inherent to cooperatives. When working with the land, working with grapes, vineyards, terroir, that's what we can master extremely well, because we have this small scale approach in the vineyard, and each of our growers is responsible for only a few parcels that he can focus on and can work extremely detailed in the vineyard, and then yes, we can attribute a lot.
Philippe, what can the fine wine world learn from cooperative?
I think fine wine will see, or is starting to see, especially as Christian mentioned in Champagne, for example, that the COPs and the growers are taking their future in hands. So they start to be in the driving seats. They have a better understanding in the value chain, and they feel that today, why should we leave to the négociant, to the metteur en marché, the adding value, or most of the adding value? And we have to then invest in people, because the tractor, materials, land is one. But now they have to understand that they have to invest in people, in marketers, in sales team, and so on, because that's why and how they will get most of the value chain in the future. And that's important for the wine industry, for the fine wine also. But that's very important in general for the agriculture and the food industry. As we can see by the hurt we get from Ukraine at the moment, the power will be for the ones who own the sourcing. Farmers own the sourcing. Now they have to get enough ambition to make the link with the ending consumer. And so they need to have, skills about marketing, skills about sales, and build the confidence.
Christian?
I mean, I think really basic things like honesty, like transparency, like working together in partnerships, sharing and helping each other. I always say there's enough market share in the world for everyone. There really is. It's great if more of us can work together to help each other. And I think there's a really great lesson from cooperatives, especially the ones that we're talking about today. So I think there's a real opportunity. And as a side note, completely unrelated, but Pauline likes me and today is my birthday. Since January, I'm also the ambassador for International Wineries for Climate Action, which was started by Miguel Torres and Katie Jackson 4 years ago. And we now have a really, really good group of people that have joined us, but we don't have a cooperative, and we would really, really, really like to have a cooperative. So based on what you guys are doing and how you're farming and the messaging you're putting out there, like if we could have a side conversation about that, I would be really happy to talk about that. Sorry, Pauline.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for all your input. I'm very biased because, as you know, I'm fascinated by the conversation. I hope that you guys in the audience had a great time as well. If you've got a last-minute question, you can put it in. If you want to come back to us with other questions, I'm also very happy that to transmit that to the rest of the panel. So this Insight series will be available as a podcast in 2 weeks. You can subscribe to the newsletter so that to make sure that you can receive it and re-listen, because there were so many different ideas. I think I need to re-listen to them a couple of times to really get to understand what it means at all the different levels. And I will leave you with a quote again from Jean-Marc Touzard, who presented his conclusion to the OIV on what cooperatives could mean for the future of wine. And he said, "The current diversity of initiatives and structures leads us to think that cooperatives can once again constitute a laboratory for experimenting with new ways of producing and selling wine together in a territory." So thank you very much for tuning in, and see you very soon, either digitally or around a glass of wine. Bye-bye.
Bye. Pauline. Bye.
In person soon. Thank you. Bye.
Ciao, ciao.